always think, oh, it'll be fine. And then I was like, oh, I've downloaded the presentation, but it looks way better on Wi-Fi. So I've now connected to my iPhone because I didn't get the Wi-Fi password. So we'll see what happens. But I'm one of those people that I can talk anyway. So bear with me. And thank you for the lovely intro. It's really nice to be here. I've heard loads of good things about this conference for ages, so I'm excited to be here. And it's also, I'm never going to be able to look at a cinema in the same way again. Like next time I watch a film, I'm just going to remember that someone sat here pretending to play a piano, and that's far more entertaining than most films I've seen recently, so thanks for the warm-up. You might be wondering why I'm qualified to talk to you about this, and it's because I've got quite a lot of experience with different product companies. I started my career, which I'll talk about in a second, at one company that wasn't so product-led. Then I moved to Booking.com. They were super product-led. I learned loads about how to do product properly. And then I've spent the last 4 years working at a variety of organizations. And I've seen how so many product people can kind of take these product principles a bit too far, and they end up alienating themselves. So whether you work in product or not, I'm sure you'll have seen and heard a lot of the things that I'll talk about today. And my encouragement is to think about how you want to operate in your company throughout this presentation and how you can work together to make the right changes. So I'm going to start with a few simple questions just to get a feel for the audience. How many people here do work in product? Just pop your hand up. Okay, that's a good amount. You're in a good space. And how many of you are like agile coaches, maybe scrum masters? Okay, that's the majority of the rest of you. And have we got anyone else, like developers, UX, any other roles? Yep. Can you just shout out what you do? Developer? Yeah? Okay, perfect. So hopefully this is all still super relevant. But if I talk about product people, you might just want to picture the person in your head that you can think about that does all of these things. I'm sure there'll be someone that comes to mind. So I've got a few more questions for you. We're going to start playing product purist bingo. Has anyone said or heard this phrase before, we need to be more product-led? Okay, a few hands. What about this one? That's not how you write an OKR. That's not an outcome. Yeah. I wish our stakeholders would come to us with a problem to solve instead of a solution. Yep, straight up for that one. And then this one is one of my favorites. Of course, we want to be product-led and we care about the customer, but the CEO or some other stakeholder really wants his features, so can you just go and build it anyway? Hands up? Yep, okay. Oh. And then product needs to do discovery on this. Anyone said or heard that? Okay, still quite a few hands. So, has anyone got 5 out of 5? Right, okay, I bought some prizes, but there's quite a few of you, so keep your hand up if you got 5. I'm just going to give some sweets to the audience over here. Feel free to, I think stuck. Feel free to share them around. I'm like, we've already got, who else? We already got some energy going this morning, but I'm about to give everyone sugar, and I'm not sure how well that's going to go. Do you want to pass that down? Anyone else? Yep, down at the bottom. Let me have some more over here. You guys all got 5. Coming through. I feel like this is going to be such a British reference, but has anyone seen Ant and Dec's Saturday Night Takeaway? That's how I feel like running around the audience, being like, here's prizes. Enjoy. Right, so feel free to eat them now. It might be a bad idea. It might be like a school teacher that's giving everyone too much sugar, so we'll see how this goes. But the key thing to point out is with all of these phrases, we've got people that are trying to be more product-led. You're trying to drive stuff forwards, but you're often in environments that aren't conducive to that. They're not allowing you to do so. And we all know that that can really create a source of friction. And there are so many talks, like throughout this yesterday and today, that are really showing us how we can do this well. So hopefully this talk can really emphasize why we need to think about doing this properly and some changes that you guys can make along the way. So I'm going to start with a little story. We're going to go throwback to 10 years ago. This is actually me in Krakow 10 years ago. And sorry for the British pronunciation of this beautiful city. I'm like, I cannot say it in Polish. And that's me with a tequila shot in my hand. So we know that was 10 years ago because there's no way I'm having one of those now. Because I was celebrating landing my first ever product role. And about 2 months later, I start working in product. And the first thing that I'm in charge of is creating a new checkout page for a travel company's website. And these pages are quite complex. There's a whole passenger details page. We need to collect all of the information for every single person on the booking. And then you've got to go through and put your payment information in. So on desktop, this form is already huge, never mind who knows like how people get through this on mobile. And my business analyst at the time said to me, hey, marketing want to add date of birth to the passenger details page. And I was like, okay, perfect, let's put it in. I came from the business, I wasn't a product person. And I was like, yep, stakeholders have told me that they want this thing. They're going to use it for some jazzy marketing. They're going to, on people's birthdays, send them an extra discount code. And we've all seen how that works. You know, when you get that email in your inbox being like, do you want to go to Pizza Hut because you can have 10% off for your birthday? And you're like, no, I really don't. That's useless. But I was told it was going to be a great idea. And my UX people were saying to me, this is terrible. We're adding an extra point of friction. You shouldn't do this. And like I say, I came from the business. So I was like, well, if the business want it, I need to deliver it. I really didn't have a product hat on at that point in time. So I launched it. How does everyone think it was going to go? Do we think it was going to go well? No, no one's saying yes. Well, plot twist, it went really fucking well. We increased conversion by 5%. And I was like, I am so good at my job. Like, you're all complaining, but look at me. I have managed to grow conversion and I'm delivering all of this value to the business. And then 1 month later, I was out on a run. I was having a great time. I was on like a lunchtime jog because I was like, I'm amazing at my job. I can do what I want. And I get a phone call from my analyst and he sounds all panicked. And I'm like, hello, what's wrong? He's like, you know, we thought we increased conversion. Well, I was looking at the wrong data. I was actually looking at the data from a different brand and we've decreased conversion by 5%. So that was my little bubble burst. I was like, oh shit, I need to go back to the drawing board and maybe think about this product side of things. And obviously we got rid of date of birth and we managed to increase conversion again. So it turns out I wasn't that good at my job. But this is my story to say that when I first started working in product, I was in an organization that was trying to be more product-led, but we were still very much listening to our stakeholders and taking their requirements on to build these kind of functionalities. And it's a journey that business has been on since to try and evolve, but we know it's not always easy. And this was definitely me. Like, this meme never gets old, does it? And I'm like, yeah, I speak to my customers. And I was treating my internal stakeholders like they were truly my customers, when actually, we all know that we need to get out there and speak to more people. So when did we actually start to care about product, and why did this happen? We all kind of know this story. We all work in this space. We know we started with Scrum, then we had Agile, and this was all about trying to deliver software really quickly. Then we got to the point where we're like, yeah, okay, we can get stuff out really fast, but what's the point if a load of it is rubbish? So in around the 2010s, we get these kind of books that talk about outcomes over outputs, and we start to think, actually, maybe we should care about why we're delivering the things that we're delivering. In 2016, Teresa Torres starts talking about the opportunity solution tree. And I don't know about you guys, but this is still one of my favorite product frameworks. It's like, it doesn't go out of fashion. This one actually really works. And then we start to see the rise of loads of really great companies. We've got companies coming out of Silicon Valley like Airbnb, Uber, Slack. And Airbnb and Uber are showing us that actually, you can use technology to completely transform a business model in the way that traditional organizations have always worked. And companies like Slack, Dropbox, and so many more started showing us that actually, you don't even need a sales team. You can just get other people to connect with people and sell the product for you. Like, isn't that great? So many people and so many business owners start to be like, why aren't we doing what those guys are doing? They're really successful. Like, what are we all doing standing still and staying behind? So there starts to be such a rise of a focus on the product lens, which leads to the product operating model, which in summary covers off these parts. So we can see the pink circle, that talks about how products are built. That's about the agile methodologies and how we can build things really quickly. But around that, we've got all of these spaces, which start from deciding what problems we're going to solve. So we really need to have the right strategy and think about the right bets that we're going to take. Then we want to think about how we're going to solve those problems. So looking at things like the opportunity solution trees, speaking to our customers, not like I did, working out how to break those problems down to make sure that we are building the right functionality that is going to work. And then the most crucial part that I think people don't talk about enough when they talk about the product operating model or being product-led is learning whether it worked or not, and then having this feedback loop that goes back to the beginning to say, do we actually need to change anything to be more successful? It's not just like we ship the software and we hope that everything's great, although I know a lot of companies still do that. And if you want a bigger breakdown, these are some of the key areas that I think is important to look at when you're trying to assess whether you're using the product operating model or you're from more of a traditional organization. And we've got loads of different bits in there. So you've got things like goals. Are you focused on impact over output? Things like strategy. Is it guided, and is your strategy a two-way conversation? So people just don't go and sit in a room, say, hey, this is what we think we should do, go and deliver this, and then you just deliver it. Sometimes you start working through a strategy and we know their bets. So some of them work, some of them don't, but you need to be able to have that feedback loop within the organization. We've also got things like decisions. Are they made based on data and discovery? Or is that based on people's opinions and politics? So there's loads of different factors in there that everyone can dive into. And there'll be a point of reflection towards the end of this talk where you can think about your own organization and what you're doing well and not so well in this space. So this slide will come up again. You've got some time to reflect and think about it now. And overall, if you want a summary, this is my favorite way to describe the value of product and what the product operating model really is the secret behind it all, behind that whole list of things, is can we learn together and can we learn quickly? We're going to assume that we know nothing, that nothing is set in stone, and that everything's an assumption until we validate it, and therefore we need to do that as quickly as possible, and we want to utilize the skills of everyone to do that together. And when I say everyone, sometimes when we think about product teams, we just think about the developers, everyone else that supports that, like Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, business analysts, testers, product people. And we don't always think about the rest of the organization. We see those as stakeholders that feed into what we do. But actually, what I've seen to be the most powerful is when you bring some of those stakeholders into the team. And they're part of that. They're part of who's helping you learn together and learn quickly, even if they're not with you full time. And like I say, there's a few reasons why people started talking about product. We've seen a whole host of companies that have done this really successfully. But there's also been a report, this was a lot of statistics by McKinsey, that have shown that there's 60% higher returns, higher operating margins, higher brand awareness, customers are bigger advocates. And there's all of this positive noise around what value product can actually bring to the organization. So we know that any senior leader or CEO that's seen that is going, well, we need to do product. We need to do product better. So this is what started to happen. Everyone's gone, right, we should do some form of product. We've got over 70% of organizations globally using some form of Agile, which is pretty impressive. So you're all doing a great job of making people use this. And one of the biggest factors is that product roles, this is a UK statistic, but product roles grew by 85% from 2015 to 2021. And I was one of those. But obviously that shows that we didn't all know how to do product very well when we started in this space. And there's growth, there's more people that expect things to be even more product-led going forwards. So this has created the rise of the product purist, as I like to call it. And this is a lot of people that have started in this kind of generation that haven't really seen how product is done in that many different organizations. But then we've gone away and we've read Marty Kagan's books and we've listened to the podcast and we've been like, this is how you should do product. This is how you should do product really well. Some of those quotes that I showed you at the start, like, that's not how we should do product. We need to do discovery. This needs to happen. And there are so many people that are now really advocating for this way of doing things, which is great. But as I'm going to talk about in a bit, it doesn't always lead to the best effects or consequences. And this is how crazy this is. I was doing research for this talk and I was like, where have product operating models failed? Like, I really want to show the other side of it and show where product isn't that great. And this was all of the summary of everything that I got on my Google search, which is basically just telling me how incredible the product operating model is and how everyone should adopt it, even if they're not a tech organization. And there is nothing that talks about any negative consequences. So we are all on the product is the best train and everyone should just do pure product. But the reality is that only 25% of companies believe that they actually have a mature product function. So this is where we start to get this conflict. As I said, we've got these product purists that are like, this is how we should do product and this is how we should do it really well. But actually, 75% of the organizations that people are working in aren't at that level. They are not able to do product to that kind of standard. And these are the reasons why. We all know, I'm sure so many of us have worked through some kind of digital transformation, and we've seen that they fail. And that doesn't mean they're never successful. That doesn't mean that everyone goes back to the old ways of working and creates code like it's the 1950s, but they don't always achieve the exact results that people have hoped for. And as I said before, we've had such a rise in product management roles. And so many product people used to be either project managers, which we all know is a very different job, or product owners, who would sit within the team and wouldn't think about the why so much. And like I say, I came from the business and we've all seen how that went for me. There's definitely a learning curve to go on to be able to do product properly. And one of the other bigger factors is that this stat was from 2021, so the number's definitely higher now, but not everyone has a CPO. I'm sure we've all worked in organizations where we've got product teams and you've even maybe got a technical lead, but you've not got anyone advocating for product at the board level. So you're trying to make all of these changes on the ground, but you've not necessarily got the buy-in across the whole business, which can make it a little bit difficult. So in reality, we have this product-led scale. We've got traditional organizations that do things like I showed you on the chart earlier. And then we've got more product-led organizations. And then we have a lot of places that sit somewhere in between. So quick show of hands from everyone. Who would say that they work at a more traditional organization? Okay, quite a few people. Yep. And who would say that they think they're at a really product-led organization? Less people. Wow. Okay. And who thinks they're somewhere in between? Okay, so I'd say we've probably got most people somewhere in between, then the traditional organization, and not many people doing product-led, which kind of goes with my statistic that only 25% of people think they've got a mature product function. And you'll all therefore know these pain points of trying to do product in the best way, but you know you sit somewhere else on this scale. And if I ask this question, where would you all like to sit? Who would like to be more product-led? Who would like to sit at the far end of the scale and you think that would add the most value to your organization? Okay, quite a few hands. And who thinks somewhere in between would be best for your organization? And who thinks being a more traditional organization is adding quite a lot of value and that's the way you'd like to keep staying? Okay, no one. So everyone kind of wants to shift themselves a bit further down the scale, which is what we're here to talk about. And the reality is this. This is a list of the 10 most profitable companies from last year. And in there, we've got Amazon, we've got Alphabet, who own Google, YouTube, etc., and there's Microsoft. And they're tech-based organizations. But everyone else in this list are things like banks, and there's an oil company there. And they don't make their money by doing product really well. They make their money through a load of historical investments, through having some huge customers, through just being able to like milk everyone because everyone needs oil and it's scarce. So they don't really care necessarily how good their product is. And yes, you've got the rise of challenger banks. You've got people like Monzo, like Starling, that are shaking things up a little bit, but they're still like nowhere near this scale. So are these companies that worried about this? Probably not. So even though they might be saying, oh yeah, we should have a product function, we want to do product, they know it's not the main driver of their success. So trying to be really product-led in that kind of organization when they know they can make a fortune regardless is going to be really hard. So this is what the product purist is starting to sound like. I'm like, sorry to anyone that's been a Scrum Master or has ever worked in this kind of space, but I think everyone knows the reputation that Agile and Scrum started to get. When everyone's like, well, that's not in the Scrum Guide. We can't do that. And everyone's just like, oh, okay, great. And you start to lose that value. And this is how everyone that I said at the beginning is starting to sound a little bit. That's not what Marty Kagan says we should do. I didn't hear that on a podcast. We need to do things better in this organization. And people aren't always going to listen to you if you sound like that, especially when you're speaking to people in the organization that aren't from a product background. They don't care. They don't know who Marty Kagan is. So whatever you say isn't necessarily going to make a difference and it's not going to work. And this is how you can spot people. I gave you some quotes at the start, but this is the kind of thing that they say. Like, has this been through discovery? That's not how we should be doing product. Or one of the best ones, and we all know the frustration of this, that people come to you and they want to know when something's going to get launched. And product purists can be so against estimations. They're like, we don't estimate. Things change all the time. This isn't going to be real, so I'm not going to give you an estimate. And they can start to sound, to some people in the organisation, like a spoilt toddler that's throwing their toys out of the pram and refusing to do their job. When actually, if we go along a bit more with what the organisation wants, we're probably going to create more trust and get more buy-in for the change we actually want to drive. So this is really my encouragement for anyone here that hears anyone saying these kind of things, to try and steer them to take a slightly different approach so they really can get more buy-in. And I'm not saying we need to go to the opposite extreme. I'm not saying we should act like this, where it's like, let's go figure out what we want to do, and then all of our roadmaps get overridden anyway. We all know that that's really frustrating. We all know that that doesn't necessarily deliver the impact that we want. So we really need to start to try and find the balance. Now, a slightly different story. I've spent the last 4 years traveling, lucky me, I know. And about 2 years ago, I came back from Brazil, and I went into a bar in the UK. And I was stood there, and I was like, I said to my friend, why is everyone dressed like a Bratz doll? Do we all remember Bratz? Everyone's got these like little crop tops and these low-rise jeans. And I was like, what has happened since I've been away? Everyone's dressing like they're from the 90s and the 2000s. Like, have I missed something here? And then as time went on and I spent more time in the UK, I was like, God, I look so unfashionable. Like, I literally look like my age, which we all know isn't a bad thing. I was like, should I start to dress like these people? I'm like, no, because this would not look good on me. Like, none of these would look good on me. Like, maybe I like the girl's jacket on the top, your guy's top right. I'm like, I could maybe pick that up, but I'm not going to just go and copy everything about these people. I'm going to adopt the pieces of the style that work for me. And then when it comes down to doing things like agile transformation or product-led transformations, sometimes we stop thinking about that. We just try and copy and paste everything that we've seen work really well somewhere else, without thinking about the ingredients and the styles that are going to work for our organisation. So where does the product operating model work really well? It works really well in digital native / tech-first organisations. All of the organisations that I showed you at the start, they're all organisations that have been born in a more recent decade that can really build on the tech. They've started with brand new tech. They invest in tech all of the time. And therefore, they've also got a fast-moving, adaptable culture. They started as startups. They started really small, and they've been able to grow and adapt from there. And even when I showed you companies like Google, I've spoken to plenty of people that work there that have still said, actually, in Google, it can be a pain in the arse. They spend so much time doing OKR planning, and then they have stakeholders that want them to deliver a certain report for something. And they spend so much time doing this bureaucracy that they don't feel like they're adding that much value anymore. So even those organisations that started digitally native and tech first, they've still slowed down and their culture hasn't become as adaptable as they've grown. So the reality is even some of the companies that we think can be really good at product still struggle with the same things that a lot of you guys do. The other ways that they can be beneficial is that the customer experience is heavily digital. So even in the example that I showed, like Uber and Airbnb, you've got a physical element of the product where you want to make sure that the home that you go and stay in isn't absolutely trashed. But you get that through things like customer reviews and through making sure that the Airbnb hosts are verified. So they still use technology to make sure that they are creating a great product. And the other crucial thing is that the business success of a lot of these organizations is tied directly to how good their product is. Whereas for legacy companies, we kind of have the opposite. We've got product isn't actually the growth engine. Like I showed you with all of the banks, product isn't creating the money. The banks are creating money other ways. There's also often quite a heavy reliance on things like having a sales team. They bring in a lot of the money. Or it might be a physical service that they offer, or the delivery of the product itself. You've got legacy cultures and legacy processes. And we were having this chat when we had dinner on Wednesday about some organizations that have got code written from so long ago that there's one person that knows how it works. And you can't get rid of that person. Say they've worked there for like 50, 70 years, or they've retired now because no one's working for that long. They're probably like 98, so whatever. But it means that there are so many people that you're reliant on to be able to do these things really well. You also potentially outsource your product, so you've not got full control of how it's built. And therefore, the key difference is that product isn't the main driver of things, it's the support function. It's an enabler for everyone else to be able to do their job really well. And that's such an important distinction as to how product-led you can become as an organization. Because whilst you're supporting other areas to add the value, you can't have full control, you can't have the full say. There are going to be other people that have a bigger voice and a louder voice about what's going to add impact than you will. So the problem comes when we really try to copy the Silicon Valley model without the Silicon Valley context. And what happens? Well, what happens is a bit like dating in your 20s. Does everyone remember dating in their 20s? Maybe some of you met your husband or wife there and it went super well, but for me, it was terrible. It was a lot of experience of messaging guys, hoping they'd text me back. They'd message me back like 2 weeks later, and then we'd meet up, and I'd be like, oh, that was great. I really hope they message me again. They seem like such a nice guy. Then they completely ghost you. And you're like, wouldn't this be a perfect relationship if this person would change these 10 things about themselves? It's not going to work, is it? Like, we all know as we get older and we get more mature, we cannot really fully change someone else. Yes, if you're in a healthy relationship dynamic, you can change someone a little bit, but you need to be quite aligned in the first place. And again, this is what happens in product companies. If we come into a place that's more traditional and we want them to be super product-led, and we're trying to drastically change them and do it all on our own, it's not going to work. It's only going to create friction. It creates tension. It creates a negative experience for everyone involved. Whereas if you're a bit more aligned in the first place, you can drive change and you can drive those incremental steps towards a better place. And I'm not just going to sit here and be like, yep, everyone just go change your product operating model, because we all know it's not that easy. And when we're struggling to do our job as product people anyway, it can be really difficult. And I say product people, anyone else here, I'm sure you're all trying to drive change. So a couple of examples of places that I've worked. We've got Booking.com. They were quite product-led because they were digitally native. They had a commission-based model, which was super important. They don't own any of their assets, so all of their investment is in tech and in people. And it means, therefore, that they can have an adaptable culture and they can pivot quickly and they can change their business strategy. They also had a real fail-fast culture of experimentation, which meant that if anyone came to you with an idea, even the CEO, you could say, interesting concept. That's not on the top of my priority list because that doesn't align with my OKRs for this quarter. We can maybe consider it next quarter and we'll run it as an experiment and we can see if it works or doesn't work. And everyone's happy for their ideas to be tested and see if they fail. So they're really data-driven. They're really focused on, can we build stuff quickly and can we learn? And that part I said to you at the beginning about the important stuff from product is learn together and learn quickly. That was very true at Booking.com. A caveat by saying most of the time. No company is perfect. They also invested long-term in tech. And then, recently, I've also worked for another travel company. It's a UK-based travel company, so you might not have heard of them, but they were called First Choice. They're part of the TUI group. And they were born in a place where they had shops and people physically sold holidays to people. And I don't know how this worked. I'm like, anyone that can tell me how someone could book a holiday like before we had the internet, and then someone in Jamaica knew that this person was going to arrive on a certain day and had a hotel room for them. Like, did they send faxes? I have no idea. But clearly they made a successful company even way back then. But the reason why they were successful is they had fixed assets. They had their own hotel concepts, they had their own airline, and they weren't about having a great product experience, they were about having a great physical experience in person and differentiating their products so people would return to those hotels year after year after year. Which meant that they were very strategically and commercially led. They didn't care so much about the tech investment. They went online when they had to because people started to buy their holidays online. But even when I started working for TUI, their parent company, like 10 years ago, they still had physical brochures where people, does anyone remember this? When you'd like go to the shop, pick up a brochure, go home, flick through, see the prices, like call a number and book your holiday. Crazy that we now talk about AI and that was like not that long ago. But it meant that first choice, it was really hard to be more product-led. Because even when they started, so when I started working with them, they were rebranding their website. And they set up a whole new team and a whole new function in the business to kind of bring first choice back to life. But when they did so, they hired people in that came from their parent company that had always done business a certain way. They hired in a new team of product people that really wanted to be product-led. But then there was such a clash of culture between these people being told, we want to act like a scale-up, we want to move fast, we want to break things, we want to test all of our ideas, we want to go quickly. And then at the same time, leadership was also saying, okay, but here's your roadmap for the next year because you need to deliver these strategic initiatives. And stakeholders were saying, well, I tell you what to do because you're a product manager and that's how product managers work in the parent company. So you've got such a clash of some people being told your job is to move things forwards and drive improvements, and the rest of the business not thinking in the same way. And like I say, all that happens in that space is that you create tension, you create friction, you're not moving on the journey together. So if we look at the scale, you've got Booking.com, which are, like I say, not perfect. We still had some JFDIs. We still had a lot of top-down initiatives that would come our way. Teams would get frustrated, but they were further along the scale. And then First Choice, which was somewhere in between. But the problem was, when I started working there, that no one had defined what that somewhere in between looked like. If you asked anyone in the organization, some people would think that they want to be way more traditional org, and some people would be saying that they want to be really product-led. And we all know this, but it's like if you don't have alignment in the beginning, your job is going to be so much harder. So one of the first things that you ever need to do is really think intentionally about where you want to sit on this scale and make sure that everyone is in line with that and everyone agrees with this so you can go on that journey together. So how do we actually find the balance? And this is the part where I'm going to get you guys to do a bit more thinking and reflecting yourself, because just being spoken at for an hour is like the hardest thing in the world. So I'm going to get you now to get your phones out. I'm going to request that you put your phone on airplane mode, because we all know that the first thing that happens is we get a Slack notification through and our brain goes somewhere else. We're at the conference to learn, so airplane mode first. Like no cheating. It's like the games earlier. I'll do it like a pub quiz. I'll take the sweets back off you if I see anyone doing anything else. The first question, if you open your notes app or anything else that you use, if that's Notion, whatever else, I want you to just reflect for a minute and think about what drives the revenue in your organization. As I said, that's one of the most important things, is to know who creates the money, because that's who's going to have the biggest say in how you should operate. So pop down like what department you think that is in your company. That should be an easy enough question, so I'll move to the next one. And then you've all already put your hand up for this, so again, this should be an easy question. I just want you to pop down the second question. Where do you want to aim for you to sit on the scale as a company? Okay, so that should have also been an easy one. The next question, I'm going to ask you 2 questions in a row, and then I'll show that chart again because that will help with this. But I really want you to think about where you're already doing well as an organization. And that might be in some of the product-led spaces, but if you think bigger, that might be that actually you have a really great sales department, or you have a really great commercial function, for example, or maybe your marketing's amazing and you get new customers all the time, but you don't retain them. So there might be areas that you can think about as an organization that you do really well in. And then we all love these kind of product principles. It's like the same kind of thing, like where are we really good and where are we really bad, and therefore what do we want to change? Like you can apply that to everything. So question number 4 is, what problems are we really trying to solve? And like I say, I'll give you this chart to make it easier. But if you have a scan through this and you just think about each of these pillars, and like I say, there might be other ones that come up as well. And for each of them, just think, are we actually really strong at this already? Or have we got problems here that we want to improve? And then, like I say, on your notes app or whatever, just note down which one each of those areas are that you want to focus on. I'll give you a couple more minutes for this one. Okay, I see a lot of serious faces. I still see some writing, but hopefully you've all taken a picture so you can go away and think about this afterwards. And then the next thing that I want you to think about is how can you actually prioritize change? This was the first thing that I did when I went to First Choice. I sat there and I worked out exactly where they were doing okay, where they were having problems, and therefore what could we improve? And like I say, like you really need to take people on an incremental journey. And I think we're all, as people that want to drive change and want to do really well, people that go from being here and we want to be over here and we want to do it tomorrow. And even when we get here, we still see how far we've still got to go and we don't realize how far we've come. And one of the best ways to drive change is to really think about what those areas are that you want to focus on and break those down into the smallest steps you can take to get to where you want to go. And even this like longer term aim that I set for where we were going to get to over the space of say 6 months still wasn't being purely product led. It still wasn't being this like product utopian organization, but it was getting us to a vision that I could see us achieving within that space of time. And for each of these areas that we'd selected that we wanted to focus on, and I don't recommend you do this in isolation, like the exercise of those 2 questions I asked you previously, I ran that with the team. It was me working with the engineering lead, working with UX lead, working with the product people, working with the senior stakeholders to all think about where we wanted to improve. Because the more that that's a collective collaboration and everyone's already agreed where they should work together, the more likely you are to be able to get that buy-in and drive change. And then I did some of this thinking based on some of my previous work, but again, you could do this as a collective to work out what those tiny steps were. And if we think about collaboration, their problem was that they either spent all of their time in meetings and had no time to do the work, or they operated fully in silos. So the first step wasn't even to drive change, it was to understand what that meeting cadence looked like. What was the purpose of the meetings? Why were they spending time there? And therefore, what could we trial to move to be a bit more async? And this stuff isn't just like a product problem. This is a problem that anyone in the organization can face. But everyone in this room is the kind of person that's like, yeah, it doesn't matter whether your role is product, agile, scrum. Your job is to try and make improvements and drive change forward so everyone can think about this. The same with things like impact focus. The team kind of had OKRs, but then like no one ever reflected on them. They set OKRs at the start of the quarter, didn't even reflect on them at the end of the quarter, and then moved on to the next thing. So the first thing was to just start reviewing, are we achieving our OKRs or not? So this stuff isn't like huge, drastic change, but it starts to create that momentum and that buy-in for people to realize that that stuff does add value. And then once you've got there, it's so much easier for everyone to be like, oh, I can see what we're doing now. This makes sense. Let's now move to the next level. So as we would like break down an MVP, try and do this with any change you're trying to drive and try and break it down to the smallest first step you can take. So for anyone that just wrote down a problem area that you wanted to focus on and wanted to work on, can you think right now about one action that you could probably take when you get to the office next week to try and drive some positive change in that space? Again, get your notes app out. Feel free to write it down. Okay, hopefully everyone's now got at least one action, but like I say, you can absolutely take this exercise away and think about this next week. But it's always good to walk away from a conference, not just having been like, oh, I've consumed loads of information, but like, no, there's something I'm really going to drive next week. So please add this to your to-do list and really start to do something about it. And then the last question I've got is how can you work together on this? Like we saw at the start, not everyone here works in product. We've got people from all disciplines, and it's not just about product being the people that drive this stuff forwards. Anyone can be doing this, and like I say, it really makes sense to collaborate on a lot of these spaces because we all have different opinions and perspectives. So the last thing that I really want anyone to think about is how can you make sure you don't just go and do this in isolation? How could you start to get other people involved to drive this kind of change forwards? Okay, hopefully we've all at least got an idea. And like I say, you can always go away and do this afterwards. So, all that I want to wrap up by saying is that creating a strong product model really isn't about trying to imitate what anyone else is doing. It's about adapting it and getting the right flavor. And the more we can do that, as opposed to just thinking about this is the way that products should be done, the more that we're really going to add the impact and add the value that our organizations need. And I think Rosario did a great talk on this yesterday, where he said that all of those traditional rules for what you should do in a corporate product world don't apply to startups. You need to implement a completely different model. And I'm going to take this a step further and say that actually, most of the time, that doesn't work anywhere. You always need to think about your context and your environment. And you can advocate for being the best product people. You can advocate for driving change all of the time, but really do that with your audience and your context and your business in mind. And then I can promise you, you will be far more successful. So thank you all for listening to me for the last hour. And I hope you all take loads of learnings from this conference and have an amazing day.